Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first speaker series. So I am just going to kick it off and give just a quick little recap on what this Impact Austin speaker series is, and then we will get to talk to our first speaker today. So just to kick off what this speaker series is, we talked about it a little bit, but just recognizing the importance of learning from experienced leaders and innovators. Impact Austin is hosting a 7-part speaker series that invites content experts from around the country to share information and showcase models connected to identified emerging challenges and opportunities with Austin. These national speakers are then joined by local community leaders to showcase the on-ground examples of work being done in our community. Questions can be asked during this conversation today via comments, and I'll talk about that in a second. But to kick this off today, we are joined by Wes Craiglow, and he is the topic of the conversation today is the power of international land use policy to grow community opportunity. And we also are joined by Holly Wallace today, and she is the Planning and Zoning Administrator for the City of Austin. So just quick housekeeping, if you do have any questions during the presentation, if you could just enter those as comments in the chat, and then we will have time to answer those after the presentation. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Wes. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the introduction, Lindsay. It's good to see everybody. Thank you very much for being here. Quickly, I love Minnesota. I've been there a number of times. It is one of my favorite states, truly, the upper Midwest, Minnesota and Wisconsin both. I don't know if I'm going to cause a rift in acknowledging Wisconsin on this call, but I do. I love the cities and towns. I love the sense of community every time I'm there. I love the pastoral, bucolic countryside as I go between cities and towns. And so it's a joy and an honor truly for me to join you on this call and maybe share a little bit of information that can help you achieve your goals there in Austin. So I'm going to talk about communities of practice today, and we're going to define communities of practice, the people that are part of communities of practice, the process that I've used to achieve success with a community of practice, and I'll show you a demonstration project that we used here in our corner of the world. I am the executive director of the Urban Land Institute in our corner of the world in Northwest Arkansas. My background is as a municipal planner, academic background in economic development, but I just simply put, I'm dedicating my life and have chosen this career field because I love helping cities be the best they can be. So I'm going to run through my slides here, and then we'll open the floor to conversation and questions if anyone has any. Without further ado. The role of communities of practice in tackling tough challenges. People first, process matters. First, a little bit about the Urban Land Institute. They pay me to make sure that I talk about our mission, so I always have to start here. ULI was founded in 1936. It is a member association currently comprised of almost 50,000 members around the world. And we leverage the power of our member network to advance our mission across the world. We have 53 chapters. We call them district councils at ULI. And again, I manage the district council here in Northwest Arkansas. Simply put, the mission is to just help cities achieve their maximum potential. The beauty of ULI is that it's cross-disciplinary in nature. So unlike many professional associations or professional member networks that are specific to an industry discipline, ULI is the place where everybody comes up out of their industry foxhole and looks across the landscape and connects, sharing ideas for best practices and policies and collaborating across challenges and opportunities. So what was our challenge here in Northwest Arkansas? We acknowledge that there's always challenges. There's always opportunities in cities, but we acknowledged one that was not germane to us. A lot of people are facing this challenge, and a lot of people are coming up with creative and interesting ways to tackle this challenge. Ours was pressing because our challenge was something that it wasn't previously a challenge. It's new to the urban environment here in Northwest Arkansas. Previously, it was part of our competitive advantage against peer markets. It's how one way we recruited and retained great talent. But now that this has become less of a strength and more of a challenge, we knew we had to move on it right away. And what's the challenge? It was housing affordability. So Northwest Arkansas is on the map. We began to explode with growth and interest, especially through COVID, but even prior to COVID. We've seen real estate values for residential housing, both for sale and for rent, simply put, skyrocket. It started, like I mentioned, before COVID, but during COVID, it was like jet fuel. Again, not germane to Northwest Arkansas, but we had always been able to look at the talent in other markets and use our affordability, our relative comparable advantage, to our advantage and say, hey, look, if you move here from Austin or Dallas or Denver or Chicago or St. Louis or KC, you can come to Northwest Arkansas, continue a thriving career with we're blessed with 3 Fortune 500 companies. And you can do that. Your dollar goes further here. But pretty soon it didn't. And we began to understand this in 2018, 2019, when this publication by one of our philanthropic partners here in the region was published. And this began to really acknowledge in a formal way that we had a big challenge. And we were going the opposite direction of where we needed to be, not just in affordability, but in the type of housing that we were producing. We weren't any longer guaranteeing that everybody was going to be able to achieve their dream of home ownership. And for some, not even achieve their need of housing security. So we went a little bit further. We at ULI worked in partnership with some other teams, and including primarily Smart Growth America, to go a little bit deeper. There are a lot of things that made our housing affordability challenges rise so quickly. What made them become a challenge so fast? And we knew we were beginning to understand that one of those was relevant to production. And that some of those production challenges, what I mean is that our supply was just barely keeping up with demand. And we know that the law of supply and demand is alive and well everywhere. And if demand is outstripping supply, costs go up. So we began to peel back another layer on that. Well, why are we not producing enough housing? And that got us to the zoning ordinances and the development codes and the entitlement and permitting processes that exist within the cities of our region. And Smart Growth America dove right in with the help of Dover Cole Partners, one of the preeminent planning firms in the U.S., and did a policy landscape assessment that you see here. And what we discovered is that, yes, in fact, there are constraints baked into the subdivision codes, the zoning codes, and the permitting processes. And those constraints at City Hall, largely in the realm of the planning department, in many cases, utilities and streets and stormwater, they play a role too. But primarily, we're looking at the codes that the city planners administer. And the truth is, they were very restrictive, and they were slowing down some of these permitting processes, and some of these regulations were slowing down the production of housing at a time when we simply couldn't afford for that to happen. So then the question becomes, how are we going to get after this? How can we rapidly do the policy and practice reforms necessary to unlock the fullest potential on the supply side of the housing chain? And there were some key recommendations here as part of this report. How are we going to do it, though? What's going to be our process? We have 29 individual cities that make up our metro. There's 6 large ones, 4 of which are kind of the anchor cities. Yeah, 4 is probably not an unreasonable number to get after, but 6 gets a little tougher. But then you add the other 20 plus small communities, some of which may not even have zoning administrators. They may have very light staff anyway. They're small towns, yet they're getting crushed by growth. I mean, cities that are doubling in population every 5 to 10 years. And these small towns don't even have the capacity to get in. For many of them may not even have a zoning ordinance. They may not even be zoning yet. So how do we support almost 30 municipalities at the same time to make sure that our the production challenges that we face are as unified. Overcoming these challenges are done in the most unified way possible. And that brought us to who are the stakeholders, who are the people, and what might the process be to get after this. And that's really what today's presentation is about. Because I think the methodology that we used and the type of people whose expertise we leveraged is relevant to any challenge in any city in America. So we created a program at ULI Northwest Arkansas titled Aligned for Affordability. You probably already understand where it's going by now with my intro here. We're here to reduce or eliminate the constraints to market rate housing. This is unsubsidized, little a affordable, market delivered standard homes. We especially want to increase production in particular forms, and that is dense, diverse, bike, pedestrian, transit friendly neighborhoods, generally in close proximity to where people live, work, shop, and play. I tend to believe that over time, the production side of our market was always going to throttle up on their response. I mean, COVID was tough, we had labor shortages and material shortages, but eventually that'll all work itself out, and the supply side will get commensurate to the demand signals. But probably the production was going to follow the path of least resistance and end up out in these smaller towns that don't have access to jobs, goods, services, and amenities, and a long way away from the more metro urban centers. So all people are doing is buying a cheaper house 15 miles outside of the metro corridor, but they're driving up their mobility and transportation costs. So this H plus T, we wanted to make sure we factored housing plus transportation total. And so what that meant is, okay, so not just are we going to attack the challenge of housing production and by eliminating constraints to the supply side, but we want to make sure that the production we do get is as responsible and wise as possible. And so this became our compass. This was our azimuth. We have a program. We think we have a program. We definitely have goals, and we know what path we want to go down. Now, who are we going to get the help with this? Again, 30 cities. And through investigation, we talked about, task forces and regional committees, and is ULI even the right host for this? And we had so many questions to wrestle with. Yes, we knew education was going to be a part of this, but we didn't want a static student cohort either, just consuming information. And so we discovered this methodology called a community of practice. And it's really quite unique. I'm going to try to tease out exactly what a COP is today on this call. It is not a cohort. It is not a task force or a committee. It's more than a team. It's really amazing. And this is the first time to my knowledge that a community of practice has been established for policy and planning planning policy and practice objectives. It's only the second community of practice that I'm aware of that's ever been initiated in our region, in our entire 500,000 person metro. It's definitely the first one I know of at the Urban Land Institute, and it was incredible. And it continues to be incredible. And I'm look forward to digging in here. So our process went as follows. We first wanted kind of a steering committee. I needed a steering committee. Long before we established this community of practice, I established kind of a core group of about a dozen people with a lot of expertise in the residential development community. That included everything from academics to elected officials to bankers to developers and architects and the like. And then they kind of provided me and my team at the ULI staff level and our project officers, they provided us regular check-ins, make sure that our Aligned for Affordability project was continuing to remain goal-focused without mission creep. So this was an important piece, kind of behind the curtain, but a very important piece. Next up was really where the fun happened. So we organized the community of practice. For us, we decided that if these constraints exist within these housing production constraints exist within the policies and practices largely administered by planning professionals, well, then our planners need to be the community of practice. So we did outreach that we have over 60 planners throughout our metro, and we did a lot of outreach direct to them, and we were able to collect planning representatives from every city in our metro who had a planner on staff, plus planners from private firms who are on contract to provide services to some of the smaller communities that don't have a planning staff member. Plus, we were able to get representatives from our metropolitan planning organization that most metros are required by federal law to have. Ours is the Northwest Arkansas Regional Planning Commission. So we had excellent representation from planners, and it was wonderful. We started in December of 21, and we focused for a 2-day workshop strictly on building the team. Many of these planners had not met one another, even though they worked in neighboring jurisdictions, even though they paid dues to the same Arkansas chapter of the American Planning Association. They've so infrequently connected with one another in a collegial way, sharing their professional capacity with one another. So it was so exciting for the first time ever to bring all these people that have a common purpose. They share this career profession of planning. It was so exciting to bring them all together. And that we knew right away in December of 2021 during that 2-day conference that we had some magic. It was a facilitated conversation. We brought in a professional facilitator who really focused on building common purpose, shared purpose, mutual trust, team cohesion, and it worked wonderfully. So now we have this group. We ended up with 15 of the 60 something planners in our region. We ended up with a core group of 15 that were like, yep, I'm in. I want to be in on this year-long journey. So we started by further understanding the market trends. We went back to that 2018-19 report, housing report that was done. We brought in an economist, a national economist from RCLCO, that helped us understand what was going on nationwide with housing production and supply and demand challenges. We visited with an economist from our university here. He's the executive director of the Center for Business and Economic Research. And we invited him to speak to the planners to further drill down to what's going on in this region. And then obviously we used that phase 1 and phase 2 landscape, a policy landscape assessment that Smart Growth America and Dover Cole had published. Very important to understand the problem. And so the community of practice spent the better part of last winter really wrapping their heads around the challenge. And we asked them to develop their problem statement. Like, they literally came up with the problem statement they were going to focus on for the rest of the year. We wanted to understand, I wanted them to hear from the private sector. I know I hang out with developers. ULI is a development heavy organization. Even though I'm a city planner by trade, my loyalties, I can share loyalties. I know too often developers and city bureaucrats don't get along. I think that's crazy. My belief is one of the reasons they don't get along is the only time they interact is on a Tuesday night during a city council meeting in a room full of skeptical neighbors and residents who are mad about a project in their neighborhood, and there's an active agenda item that's legally binding and has money attached to it. Obviously, this is an unhealthy environment for developers and planners to talk, but they're all busy and they don't really make time to go to happy hours together. And so we knew we had to bring them together. And so we hosted this fishbowl discussion. It ended up being very powerful. And we just had some folks from the residential development community sit in the middle of a room and do Q&A with a facilitator, a moderator, and talk about what life was like from their point of view. These are men and women who get paid to deliver houses to the landscape, and they want nothing more than to do their job well and produce exactly the number of houses for our region that our region demands. Why does it have to be so difficult for me to build homes for people? And it was a wonderful 1.5 hour long conversation. You can see the boom mic here. We filmed it, recorded it, continue to distribute this. I can get you a copy. It was a wonderful conversation. And it just gave an opportunity for our city planners and some elected officials to just sit in the room and listen and build empathy for the producers of the world. I can't recommend Fishbowl. It's a liberating structure for important dialogue. I cannot recommend Fishbowls enough. It was a powerful day. Then we spent the next 6 months educating around the problem statement that the planners had developed for themselves. Here's one of the beauties of a community of practice that makes it different than a student cohort. They write the syllabus. Big difference. They're educating, which makes it different than a task force, right? Task force would just dive right in and tackle a problem. They're a cohort, they're educating, they're building professional capacity. They're a team because they've got something in common, a mutual shared purpose. They're building trust. But the community, it's a wonderful blend of them all. Ultimately, what matters is they literally not just chose their content for 6 months straight, for 6 monthly workshops. They wrote their syllabus, but they asked for particular professors. And then it became imperative on us at ULI to go find the teacher, either by name or at least by topical expertise, and deliver them the type of education they wanted. They got to steer the ship as students. Created a ton of buy-in, ton of trust, a ton of credibility within that community of practice. They knew they were carrying the football. We were just here to facilitate the learning environment. So over the course of 6 months, each month we hosted a one-day workshop, and it was wonderful. It was an education component, and then it became a redlining component where the planners would sit and they would learn about a particular facet of policy or entitlement that was more modern, that was really having an impact in another community in the country. And then they would literally go in and autopsy their zoning code and figure out, like, okay, that must be one of the constraints, right? And if I eliminate that, or I adjust to this policy or entitlement practice, then I too can, make my zoning ordinance, make my city more modern, but I can also throttle up the production in responsible forms in my city. At the finish line of that year, the planners authored, again, it's their journey. They came together and authored over a 2-day workshop period a toolkit. But we decided to not call it a toolkit, even though it's full of wonderful tools and useful good ideas. It's a roadmap. It is a prioritized roadmap. Policy in the Northwest Arkansas housing policy and practice roadmap. And couldn't be prouder of it. Come to find out, it's a 60-page document. There's a graphic designer that's helping turn it from a Word document outline style into a final product that we can distribute around the region. And it is what it sounds like. It is a roadmap. It will help the communities of our region understand the challenge we face, understand some best practices for policy and entitlement practices, and then lay out by priority, like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, in a very almost clinical way, the path forward for the cities. And it's a buffet. It doesn't have to confine them. It's if you choose this reform, this is what you can expect. It's going to be different in every city because not every city has the same zoning ordinance. And every city's going to want to tackle their problems a little bit differently because, some things are politically palatable in one town that may not be in the other. Or there could be more education in one city that's needed and not in another. So the document ends up being quite adaptive and flexible and frankly, kind of a joy to use. I've seen it now in PDF form and in draft, but it's glossy, it's easy to read, and I look forward to seeing it on the desks of officials in city halls throughout the region. This is where we are today. So now we've got these planners and they've got their roadmap and they've got this wonderful story to tell about their process. And we're putting them on stages, like whether they're standing in front of their city council asking for reforms already, and it's already happened. I've attended 2 of those meetings. And by the way, another beautiful thing about a community of practice is that when a planner jumps on the community practice Facebook group and says, hey, everybody, I'm taking a couple of these reforms from our roadmap to my city council next Tuesday night to ask for some changes to our code or our permitting process. Will anybody join me? The planners drive across the metro to join their teammate in the COP on that Tuesday night, and they can say, hey, I was part of his or her journey all last year. We were students and leaders together on this. And I can tell you it was done with credibility, and it was done with a lot of expertise and shared understanding development. And these are really impactful reforms that your planning director or whomever is asking about. So it's just wonderful to see them making change happen. We're also getting them in front of audiences at conferences, both regional and hopefully soon to be national conferences, because again, I think the power of this process and the people that make it up is worth using in communities across the country. So why was this the right fit? I think you're kind of getting it by now, so I'll try to click through these slides pretty quickly. Again, it's not a team, it's not a task force, it's not a committee, it's more than a student cohort. It's a blend of all of those things. They have something in common. In our case, it was planners that are professional planners that have obligated their lives to improving cities. But it could be different. It could be historic preservationists. It could be parks and rec people. It could be public safety people. It could be watershed and floodplain management people. Whatever your city's challenges are, who are the experts? Who are the experts? It's very important, because you take expertise with a community of practice and you mass it into one big brain trust and you concentrate it on a problem that's vexing you. It's wonderful, and it has some incredible benefits to just bring experts together, not just property owners on the task force. And I'm a business owner and I'm a chamber member, therefore I made the cut on the task force. These are experts. They're passionate. As experts, they've already dedicated their life. They give half of their waking hours and a third of their total life to their profession. Most of us that choose a profession for life, in this case planners, in our case planners, they love it. It fuels them. And so you can expect a community of practice to stay engaged. They're bonded. It's the spirit of a team, but they flatten the structure. Leaders can ebb and flow. Every voice matters. It's a very horizontal hierarchy. Everybody communicates, collaborates. There's tons of mutual trust, and it's wonderful. Now, like I mentioned, the COP went from this thing we did last year at Align for Affordability. They've built a Facebook group that's just full of chit chat, and now they're getting together once a month. One of the regional planners is hosting like a happy hour, and the planners are starting to get together more socially. Obviously, they're talking about work when they're there, but like I love to see that, and it's a spirit and collegiality that was not present prior to last year. A community of practice is flexible and agile. It's not a task force that only does one thing. Communities of practice can take different shapes. They're very responsive. It's human-centered. It's not SOP driven. There's not like a rule book to how they have to function. They respond and they get dynamic, and then maybe a new leader rises, other people fall, maybe other people come in, and they're happy experimenting. They're comfortable with a little bit of risk. Again, they're experts. They're comfortable with a little bit of risk of like, what happens if this particular reform or this particular action item, it doesn't turn out the way we thought? Who cares? We're going to experiment. There's nothing in the city that says you're not allowed to make mistakes. So what we've discovered is that because of their expertise and their passion and their excitement, they're willing to experiment a little bit, and sometimes that can be the best thing we need. Government can kind of be it could be a little bit risk averse. So it's fun to see them experiment and develop solutions quickly. And then finally, communities of practice are enduring. Unlike a task force or an ad hoc committee that is there for a reason and then disassembles, communities of practice can be and should be, frankly, enduring. There are no terms to your chair position or secretary position, or I'm on the board or in this committee, appointed by the mayor for 2 years or whatever. None of that. It ebbs and flows. It's very organic, and there's no reason that community of practice cannot exist in your community, in your city, forever. It can respond when it needs to. Maybe other times it's not as responsive, but it's there to be leveraged. That's why I think the power of a Facebook group. I was so happy that they want to do a Facebook group, because now we have a place to go and find them. Like, where do we send up the bat signal when we need all of this expertise massed and concentrated on a particular challenge? We go to the Facebook group, fire up the bat signal, and say, hey, we got something. We need you here now. And I have faith that they will respond. So that's the story of our people, the community of practice. That's the story of the process that they went through, and a demonstration project of a really important challenge they rallied around and are already beginning to impact in a positive way. Again, my name is Wes, and I'm here for questions if anybody has any.
Lindsay, are you able to see the meeting chat?
Yes, I am. And it looks like we did get a question from Val. Um, can Wes give some examples of an entitlement practice and how to adjust those?
Yeah, sure. So entitlement is just a fancy word for permitting. So what we discovered was that I can think of so many examples. So here's one. Um, Several of the cities in Northwest Arkansas have zoning codes that don't let people live in non-residential districts. So what we discovered was that there are vacant strip malls on commercially zoned property in certain parts of our city that developers wanted to adaptively reuse and repurpose for housing. And they weren't allowed to. And the fact that that developer had to go through a process to rezone or get a conditional use permit in order to use a largely vacant or completely vacant aging structure that had very little that provided very little value to the commercial sector. A developer wanted to turn that into houses for people. It would be cool, like eclectic, like, I mean, I can imagine a little lofty industrial feel. Not allowed. And in one case, a developer came in one of our cities and was denied. Neighbors, people came out from the community and spoke at a city council meeting about the perils of letting people live in a formerly commercial building. Maybe there's places and moments in history where that's appropriate to deny that sort of thing. But at a moment when we're facing a housing crisis in America, a significant challenge, maybe not a crisis in our region, but definitely a significant challenge, now's not the time to keep a commercial building vacant when a developer and a banker are ready to turn it into apartments. It doesn't make sense. So that's what I mean by an entitlement practice. The process of getting a permit to make that change should be very easy. We should eliminate every barrier. I can't think of very many reasons why we should tell somebody that owns commercial land that they're not allowed to use it for residential. It's kind of, we should bake in the practice of downzoning. It should just be allowed. Maybe we have this cap on the ceiling for upzoning, making things more intensive in use, and generally agricultural, residential, office, commercial, industrial. That's kind of the hierarchy of intensity. I get we don't want to go up without some entitlement review. But going down in intensity, going from a commercial use to a residential use, that lowers intensity. It doesn't necessarily generate any more traffic. Like there should be very little, if any, barriers to entry. And so that's just one of the targets that comes to mind. But I'll bet you if you dig around your subdivision ordinance and your zoning ordinance, you may discover really it's not regulatory. This is process driven. This is the business administrative side of the house. What are the red tape gates I got to go through to do pretty responsible, reasonable, pragmatic things in my city? And if you do a similar autopsy, that policy and practice landscape assessment, if you do this in your community, you may discover that there's some red tape in there and no one knows where it came from. It just became probably from 10 or 20 years past. Somebody got mad at a council meeting. Someone said, change that, fix it. And then it's there. It's this little wart stuck into the methodologies or the regulations that exist in your town. No one knows how it got there. Get rid of it. If it doesn't make sense and it's constraining the solutions that to your challenges, get rid of it, cut it out. So that's an example.
Hey, Wes, Steve King, if I could ask, when you were getting together the folks to start the community of practice, were there challenges in first of all finding the folks that you wanted to invite or who should be on, and then once they were on, were there challenges in continuing that passion, as you mentioned they all had, and is there ebbs and flows, and what do you do with maybe some folks just became disengaged? And you got a lot of communities. Do you just run right past them and go without, or do you continue to try to engage with them?
Always trying to engage. Great question, by the way, Steve. But like the engagement, the outreach never stops. And I'll go one step further and use the word incentive. Like there's got to be some joy in it, and there's maybe some return on this investment. Like bluntly put, we did outreach straight to the mayors. We did outreach to chairs of planning commission. We did outreach to planning directors. We knew that if we're asking for roughly 40 hours of their professional staff members' time over the course of a year, probably easily I mean, it's well more than 80 hours, 100 hours, 120. Like if we're asking for them to be permitted to leave the office to come join this journey, we knew we had to get buy-in from the boss. So that's truly where we began. We developed some outreach, some one-pagers that kind of explained the challenge we're facing, why we're attacking it, why we think the planners are the right person, rough idea of maybe the path we would take. But again, we didn't want to bias our planners once they arrived. So, but we talked first to the mayors. We talked first to the planning directors. So that was the buy-in initially. I think the second thing is that we had to make sure every time we were together, there was value. I think again, they're pros. They love this stuff. This is their life's work, Steve. And so if they're going to give up, I mean, who doesn't like to leave the office for a day and hang out with a bunch of planners? I mean, it's cool. It's kind of like a little micro conference once a month through my calendar. Get out and be around people like me, but it better be good. Because if we get them there, if we invite planners into a workshop room and we bring in some guest speakers, or we're doing whatever we're doing, it can't be a waste of their time, because they've got commitments and a limited attention span. And even as cool as it is to get out of the office for a day and come be around other planners and have ULI buy you lunch, they don't want to waste their time. And then the third thing, like I mentioned, is incentives. What can we do to really add to, entice them, keep a carrot out there? And so I think tapping into the ego of like, you're leaders, you're the hero your community's waiting for, get on this stage and tell the story and lead, right? So some people that gets them to respond, the pride associated with being a part of something important. For some people, it's going to be a little more transactional. So we convinced ULI headquarters to offer up some, we got some funding to the ULI Foundation up in Washington, D.C., and we were able to provide some public associate memberships for ULI, and those memberships matter because it gets you discounts to some other ULI professional development events, get you access to some of our national conferences and a lot of our database, thousands and thousands of publications in the ULI Knowledge Finder that then they got access to as professionals. So those memberships mattered, and yeah, I think those three things: direct outreach to the top, make sure every day is valuable and they're getting something out of it. And then if you need to dangle a few carrots, how do you sweeten that pot up? And I'm sure there's others that aren't coming to mind, but that worked for us, Steve.
Thank you.
You got it. So what's our next question here, Lindsay?
So it looks like there was another question, kind of a follow-up from the first one that Val asked. And just, can you speak to the intersection of agriculture and urban growth at all?
Oh, yeah.
In terms of entitlement practice? And I think there was some chatter on the chat about that, but do you have anything to add, Wes?
Yeah, I do. So this is something I'm deeply passionate about. And I've spoken to a number of audiences here in Northwest Arkansas about the urban-rural interface, where America is losing tens of millions of acres per year, tens of millions over the last decade, 20 years, to urban sprawl. I grew up on a farm. It was a cattle operation. We have a $1.2 billion poultry and cattle economy right here in our 2-county metro. I mean, like just outside the urban metro is a thriving agricultural economy. Many tens of thousands of jobs are agricultural related here in our corner of the woods and our corner of the world. And I care deeply about this. So I do. I think a lot about it. I write about it. I speak about it. And it's hard. I'm just going to put it bluntly. It's really hard, because growth is like water. It's going to flow down the path of least resistance, especially as it relates to those producers who just want to churn their products. And I'm not throwing them under the bus, but they're out there. They'll and I don't want to say anything private sector. Some of them are school districts in our corner of the world. They're more than happy to go way out. It's miles beyond the urban centers, the urban cores, and purchase cheap land, pastures, and convert them to their use. Maybe they're 800 units of a garden apartment. or maybe they're, 150 single family homes on cul-de-sacs, or maybe there it's a elementary school because that's where the cheap land was and the school district needed to get out there. And then they look back at the city and they're like, on me. I need street, sewer, water, electric, police, fire, sanitation services. And while you're at it, if you can throw a park out here, that would be cool too. And we end up, cities end up responding to that style of growth. And we're 75 years into this growth model in this country. And it's really, really hard to unring that bell, especially when the vast majority of us have access to a personally owned automobile, and we can make that turn and burn out to the countryside. And in doing that, we are eating up our wildlands. We are eating up our floodplains and the way that Mother Nature absorbs rainwater. And we are eating up our agricultural economies. The problem is, in many cases, the counties don't zone, and every city is going to be different. In Arkansas, we have no state zoning, and we have light enabling for counties to zone, and very often it's not politically palatable. So when it comes to the entitlement process, many developers know that if they just step across city limits out into unincorporated county, it's kind of lawless. They can get away and do whatever they want. So again, that water flows down the path of least resistance, especially for those producers that don't see value in denser development. Yeah, and it's hard. I don't have all the solutions. It's a totally different lecture. I literally used to teach class, and this was one of my lectures. I could talk about urban-rural interface for an hour and talk about all the tools and techniques to achieve results in your community, some of which are legal, some of which are not. You may have state enabling legislation. You may have a legislature you got to go through first to provide cities and counties literally the tools they need to do this work. It's hard. And that's about the best I can offer. It's as easy to change the culture as it is to change the laws, and that's to say it's not easy.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with regards, I'm scanning the chat now, Lindsay, and with regards to our small city program, that's, Dan, you know this, it's a little bit different. We recognize that part of our journey with AFA last year, with working with the economists, we developed an understanding that 53%, as of last March, 53% of all housing starts in our region were not going to the big 6 cities. They were going to the small 22, 23 small cities or the unincorporated areas of the county. More than half our growth was going to parts of our metro that didn't have close proximity to jobs, goods, services, and amenities, and methods or in forms that were consuming the landscape, consuming our precious wildland areas, and interfering with stormwater management, which is really very important to us. I don't know how it is, but stormwater management is a big deal here. We have steep hills and valleys, the foothills of the Ozarks, and when it rains hard, it floods bad. So we've got to be cautious about where we have space for things to flood and Mother Nature to manage all of that stormwater. So yeah, it's a problem. So we did develop the Small Cities Initiative. It doesn't really get after the unincorporated areas of our counties, but it does help small cities. And so we've begun to build capacity with them, using the ULI member network as a brain trust, to tackle problems, the challenges that some of these small cities have. Because again, they may not even have a planner on staff. They're just getting hammered by growth, residential growth, and strip malls and Dollar Generals and stuff like that. And they may not have much, if any, regulations for any of it. So how do we help these cities of 5,000 and 10,000 people get out in front of some of their growth challenges? So that's our Small Cities Initiative. And
Wes, was your growth to the outside the city core based on just land affordability, and then, or was it also just folks didn't want to be in that dense of an area?
Yeah, to be fair, I think some people don't want to be in the city. Some people enjoy the rural countryside, and I'm far be it from me to say that that's wrong. I believe, Jane Jacobs, in her seminal publication, Death and Life of Great American Cities, there's a phrase in there that I wrote as a young grad student and put it on a Post-it note above my desk where it hung for over a decade. And it said, the purpose of cities is multiplicity of choice. And what Jane Jacobs meant by that is that great cities offer something for everybody. They're not homogenous. They're actually quite complex. And the best ones offer a little bit of everything. I say that to say this, which is like, sure, if people want a 1 acre or 5 acre parcel of land and live outside in a rural environment, that's amazing. And far be it from me to say no to that. But the pace of expansion and the forms that are going in our rural landscape beyond that urban rural interface, in most cases, and by most, I mean the volume of residential units and commercial and office square footage, mostly commercial, like gas stations and drive-through restaurants and stuff. That stuff is, it's exactly what you would find in the city. It's going to be single family homes on a 1/4 of an acre lot with a 27-foot wide curb to curb street out front and a handy little backyard and a 2-car garage. And they're out there on the landscape in the county as far as you can see. Or they're 1,000 and 1,200 unit apartment buildings that are frankly housing college students. We have 2 universities and college here. Our state university is here. It's over 30,000 students. And I know that the city of Fayetteville, where I live here, is about 1,300 residential units short of where we need to be for our current population. Those students, and they're mostly students, I can just tell you, those students are getting squirted to find housing outside of the city. And they're going to these tiny towns or unincorporated areas where these massive apartment complexes are being built as fast as possible. And I'm not faulting the banks and the developers for choosing to go buy that cheap property, just like I don't fault the school district for choosing to buy. It's the easy thing to do to respond to the crisis of demand that we have. I get it. I know why it's happening. But 1,000-unit apartment complexes, frankly, and I'm going to be blunt here, they don't belong on cheap land 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 miles outside of the city limits. They don't, especially when they're like county roads. That developer's not building several miles of new county road into a 4-lane arterial. They're probably not even doing any pedestrian and bicycling infrastructure. So so from a mobility and transportation point of view, from a stormwater point of view, from an interruption of the agrarian economy point of view, and just from the time people spend stuck in traffic trying to get to and from these big developments, these big residential developments outside city limits, back to where they work, shop, play, dine, eat, hang out with friends and family, like the time of just sitting in traffic. There are so many good reasons to not be doing this in America. So many. For the few that really desire rural living, got it. But by the volume of development happening in our unincorporated areas in our small towns, it's not rural living. It's where the production squirts when it's too constrained to do where it belongs. That's why it's happening. And that's as bluntly as I can put it.
Hey, Wes, thank you, man. Really appreciate your feedback. Want to make sure that we also have time for Holly to present as well and to answer any questions. As one of the local doers of actually talking about and implementing exactly what you're talking about, Wes. So Holly, are you ready to jump in?
Yeah, sure. We can go to the first slide.
Great.
But yeah, thank you, Wes. Lots of things to think about. Very inspiring way to look at a problem. I hadn't personally heard of the community of practice before. So definitely something that I will be keeping an eye out for. And then I'm sure it'll generate more conversation with our group as we move forward. So this slide is just giving you an overview of the things that we address in the planning department in Austin. Being a smaller community, we tend to do a little bit of everything. So we actually include planning, which I am considered the city planner, which includes our zoning districts and standards, comprehensive plan, downtown master plan, also some commissions, community development, code enforcement. We also look at floodplain management, annexation, which is fits in with what the conversation that we were just having with how our county and city interact with development. We have zoning, which includes public nuisance, hazardous structures, vacant properties. We have also the building department, which enforces the state building code for new construction and renovation. And we also have a rental department that does licensing and code inspections of rental properties. Next slide. Am I advancing my own slides here? Or is that going to be Wes? Okay, thanks.
Wes is, there you go. Okay. Thanks.
So just to kind of there, you know, every community has probably a very long list of things that their goals, their needs, their aspirations. This is just one detail of that, and it kind of dovetailed with the housing matter that Wes had talked about in his presentation. We had a recently, well, in April 2022, Counselors of Real Estate report for improving and expanding Austin's housing supply. So we also have some concerns with having enough housing for the people that live here now and for the people that we want to bring into Austin. The CRE, the Counselors of Real Estate, they're professionals in the real estate world. It's a volunteer organization. But they came to Austin. They spent some time talking to many people and organizations. They developed a report, which is about 40 pages with some additional indexes with information about their group and some of the sources that they used for the report. Their major findings were, again, that, you know, Austin isn't really unique with regard to all the communities in our region and probably nationally have some issues with housing. For us, we specifically have very few single family developments since the 1970s. We also have a great deal of older single family housing stock that needs repair or replacement of major building components. But we have had recent success in the last 4 or 5 years in multifamily housing, both market rate and rent restricted or subsidized, which have full occupancy and wait lists. And then also plats in Austin, they are determined to be relatively low cost to build out compared to other areas in the region. Next slide. Some of the recommendations that came out of that report, there's many recommendations, and it is actually a pretty quick read, I think, from my perspective. And we have, I'm not sure if we have a link to that, but it is on our city website. So some of the recommendations were that we should rehabilitate our existing housing stock, and some of those could be, some of those incentives for rehabilitation could be technical assistance, financial support, and then they also brought up PR activities, or, you know, things that could make it more trendy to talk about and maybe encourage rehabilitation. So things like tours and speakers and gardens, neighborhood development. And then also another recommendation was promotion of Austin to developers and home builders. Again, trying to get the word out, promotion, engagement, procurement. Another interesting recommendation was creating a housing director position. And then also working with multifamily property owners for to develop preservation plans. Next slide. So normally, you know, the speaker would take questions just like we did with Wes, but in this instance, we actually have questions for those of you on the call and those of you who may be viewing the video. You know, can we do all of these things that were recommended in this report? And how long should it take? And can a housing director make a bigger impact? Do we need to cultivate new local developers? Can we focus solely on new single family homes? That seems to be something that's come out in conversations that we've had on this in the last year. And another thing to keep in mind is what biases are inherent in our approaches that we choose. And then what resources are necessary to accomplish these goals. And hopefully we can create more conversations surrounding these questions. I think this fits in well with the community of practice idea. I can't answer all these questions. I mean, they're just like one question begs another question, it seems like. And, you know, a city is just such a complex environment. And whenever we make an adjustment in one area, it has an impact in another area. And so it's just a very complex question, although breaking it down into smaller, maybe more manageable pieces is helpful. But that's all I have, and welcome any questions that people might have.
Holly, I have one because we've talked about this, is that obviously through municipal law and planning commission, city council, there's sort of municipal law that you guys need to take a leadership role, but we also recognize that it is not just the city's job to move this forward. So with these questions, and I throw this out to everybody that's on the call, Holly, you, Craig, Mayor, who else needs to be at the table to move the needle on these kind of conversations?
From my perspective, when we look at, it just seems like we have a lot of very active, involved professional people, but we don't have, one group that necessarily connects, like in a very natural way necessarily. So it is hard to say who should be at the table. Everyone seems like, but.
And
yeah, if anyone else.
Oh, sorry. Follow up on that. As a staffer, what role do the legislative bodies play? When we heard Wes talk about a planner going in front of city council and trying to bring something to the table, and you actually have a whole slew of people show up to support that initiative, what role does city council and your planning department play appropriately within this conversation?
I think getting community involvement is always a challenge. I think if you talk to any of the organizations in our community, even though we seem to have a lot of familiar faces in a lot of different roles in the community, and it'd be nice to maybe just get a larger have a larger impact out among the residents, where they would be interested enough to come to a meeting or talk to our elected officials. We don't have a lot of voices in support necessarily on regular, what I would call regular zoning issues. We've updated our zoning code recently. We've done our downtown master plan and our comprehensive plan. And, there's just very little interest in the community overall. And I think we do this in a similar fashion to other communities based on planning conferences I've been to. I think that the percentage response that Minneapolis has gotten to outreach is similar to ours, but it's just on a different scale. So just not sure how to really, I guess, kickstart more interest and engagement in the community. And we do go where people are. We have some events that we try to get feedback on, feedback from people on, but I think part of it's a resource issue too, maybe if we have to rely on city staff to just go out and do door-to-door, engagement, or, trying to find people where they're at. I read somewhere once that, people will come to City Hall when they're angry because there's no barrier that they're not going to fight their way through, but, people just trying to figure out where do these meetings happen, and where do I park, and what time are they, and will I have, childcare, and those things can all just kind of be a stumbling block, I feel like.
So one of the other big questions then to follow up with is, how can folks on this call and beyond get involved and support these efforts? That's a very open-ended question, but one that I think we're hearing, Holly, and through multiple conversations, that it takes a village and it's more than just city staff to move the needle on these things. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's very fair. And it would be very welcome. We
Yeah.
could definitely use the help and support.
I'm just going to chime in. I'm Angie Lepelt with Monmouth County Environmental Services, and I'm Holly's counterpart in the country, in the agricultural outside municipal areas. And one of the things that Holly and I have had conversations over the years and we struggle with is, we have areas for development that are ripe. And we have developers that want to maintain, out in the agricultural, area on sewer or on septic and private wells. But as the city grows and these areas become problematic for maintaining or sustaining septic systems, it's difficult to annex them, into the city after the fact and provide those services. And not only is it difficult, it can be costly. And so how do we entice the developers to put in that money and that infrastructure up front where they can get higher densities and more bang, for their buck than these large sprawling parcels? And I think the hurdle that I keep hearing, and Holly, please chime in, is the cost of that initial infrastructure and getting that sewer and water out there. And they kind of just turn away from that.
Yeah. And I think mutual, and this has been brought up on several conversations through the past 2 months, is more mutual planning and support between county and the city through comp plan. And I know you and Holly talk, and Craig Mayer talk, and there's a lot of those alignment pieces. But how does your city leadership and your county leadership actually start to organize around some of these ideas a little bit more effectively, so it just doesn't fall on the shoulders of city staff, decision making and things? And while we're coming on 10:03, and I know this is great conversation, Angie, and I really appreciate that comment. We want to make sure that we address this moving forward with some aligning strategies. But we deal with this as well here in Northwest Arkansas, the conversation of the county versus the city, and the county and the city. Sometimes it's a versus, and sometimes it's an and. We're also dealing with some significant issues coming from Little Rock in the sense of state legislation, hampering the ability for some of those partnerships to actually occur because of legislation. So there's a lot of pieces to this, Angie, but I think what you've identified is definitely something that has to be addressed through this continued process. And maybe as we grow the speaker series, one of the upcoming speaker series is actually all about the city and the county and mutual planning and how that functions, with an example of a project out of Eastern Oklahoma in which we did a county-wide comprehensive plan, and the cities were very much a part of that at the same time they were doing their comp plan. And so it really created some alignment about land use and zoning, infrastructure, where you make those investments, et cetera, et cetera. So that's going to be an upcoming speaker series that we can have that. And hopefully you can join us for that as part of that conversation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So,
Daniel?
Yes.
Craig Clark here, just to kind of tie some things together, I think, and how folks can help be involved. I think just as a matter of practice, we do work together with all of our counterparts quite well. But what I really like about Impact Austin and Accelerate Austin and the promise that holds is really not having it be the individual entities' task. So whether it be the city or county, I think we still have left it to each individual group to do that, and having that shared buy-in from folks that it isn't the city's project, it's Accelerate Austin or it's Impact Austin to do the technical stuff, to help carry that across with what Wes said about having other planners show up at one individual's planning commission. I mean, what a powerful example to elected leaders of what a broader buy-in is bringing to the table. I think we can capture some of that same promise through Impact Austin and Accelerate Austin. So look forward to continuing that working relationship with everybody and taking it to the next level.
Mhm. And with just a point of logistics, we recorded this session. We're going to clean it up so it isn't full of the spaces in between to actually make it a little bit tighter. And then we'll be uploading this to the Impact Austin website. We'll also be creating links to this. So please, once we put the links up there, share it with your constituents and your folks. This is part of an ongoing effort, to Craig's point, on building that coalition around many of these activities. So it's not just, once again, one group or another group that are doing this. It really takes a village to move this stuff forward. Lindsay, is there anything else you want to add? Holly, Craig, Mayor, before we end this awesome session?
From my perspective, I just wanted to say thank you to Wes and Holly. I think great insights today. And Craig, to your point, I know I took away a lot of things on this community of practice from an Impact Austin perspective. It can be applied a lot of different ways, I think, too. So this was a great conversation. I think a really good way to kick off this speaker series. So thanks for the participation, everyone.
Agree. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to meet you all here on the Zoom call, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Wes. Appreciate it. See y'all.
All right, everybody, have a great St. Patrick's Day.
Happy
Enjoy
St.
the weekend.
Right on. You too, Tanya. Take
You
care.
too. Thank you.
Take care now. Bye.
Bye-bye.